here's the interesting part. So when women are mentored by men, they make more money. They have more promotions. They're more successful. We're more likely to retain them in our organization. They're more likely to have a higher organizational identity and commitment to the organization.
Welcome to Ultrahabits. Here, we go under the hood with our guests to unpack the minutiae and to understand what processes and systems they engage or research that result in ultra-enhanced living.
Hey guys, it's RJ Singh here, and we are bringing to you our next guest today, Dr. David Smith. Now, David has co-authored 2 books with his good friend and colleague, Brad Johnson, Good Guys, How Men Could Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace, and Athena Rising. Now, his subject matter that he focuses on is cross-gender mentorship, why it's so critical for us guys to take a part in hand in mentoring the women within our organizations to help them rise. He goes into why it's important that it is this way and that men actually take an active interest, and how we are as males in a unique position to help women to get a seat at the table. Super interesting conversation. David spent time at the Naval Academy. He is a PhD and a super interesting guy. Now, before we leave you in the hands of David, we are going to read a review from actually one of David's friends and colleague from the military, albeit different branch, Shannon Paulson. She's a global keynote speaker, the founder of the Grit Institute, and the author of The Grit Factor, Courage, Resilience, and Leadership in the Most Male-Dominated Industry in the World. She goes on to say that RJ does an amazing job really getting to the heart of the experiences of his guests. And I enjoyed our conversation very much, finding deeper insights in some places my own story than I'd previously imagined. He's obviously done his own work, and his quest to continue learning and improving is evident, and one he shares with great heart to the benefits of his listeners. Thank you so much, Shannon. Y'all out there in listener land, have a great week. If you haven't done so, go to the website, www.ultrahabits.co, subscribe, learn about all the cool stuff we are doing. Over and out. Have a great one, guys. Peace. David, welcome to the Ultra Habits Show. It is a early morning here in Sydney, Australia. Where are you joining us from today, David?
I am in Baltimore, Maryland, and we're in our afternoon. So you are the end of the day, and you're between me and a cold one.
Yes. So look, I've been actually trying to catch up with you for some time. I think you were in the process of a relocation, right? You were moving house and family. Is that right?
We did. We just recently relocated from Newport, Rhode Island, New England area of the U.S. down to more of the Mid-Atlantic here in Baltimore.
Right. So, I came across your work several months ago, and it was really interesting in the sense that everyone's talking about mentoring, but your material was quite different in the sense as to why men need to take an interest in the mentorship of women. What I'm keen to understand is what led you into this work. Was it like, were you the bad guy, or were you always a good guy, or like what made you realize that this was a piece of work that you needed to focus on?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad, RJ, you brought that up. And, it's never just one thing, of course, right? There's lots of aspects that come into play here. And, I would tell you that, one of them is that, so my background for the listeners out there, I spent 30 years active duty in the U.S. military, in the Navy, and 20 of those as an aviator, Navy pilot. And one of the things, though, that I learned very early in my career because of my partner and spouse and better half, who was also a naval officer, was kind of watching her experiences at the same time as we kind of went through our careers in parallel. And very different experiences and very different opportunities and access to resources and information. Mentoring just being one of those, right? Mentoring and the sponsoring function, the advocacy function there, I think is part of that too. But seeing that, those things didn't kind of come naturally to her, and it wasn't unique to her. It was more unique to women in particular in the military that we saw that. Whereas I didn't have to go very far to look for those things. They just kind of naturally came to me. And I saw that with a lot of other men as well, that was just part of how we operated. And it was very natural for us to come together. And it's kind of the birds of a feather flock together aspect, right? But if we only do it that way, right, that there's a minority groups of people, and in particular, around the military at that time, less than 10% of the military was included women. So very, very small percentage, small group out there. They just weren't getting the same access, the same quality of mentoring that we as men did. And I would tell you that, later on in my career, as I left naval aviation and I became a professor, I went back to earn my PhD in sociology and taught at the Naval Academy in Annapolis for many years. And that's where I met my good friend and colleague and co-author for our book, Athena Rising, Brad Johnson. And Brad's a clinical psychologist, and he's done all of his research in the area of mentoring relationships and what makes for great mentoring. And one of the things in many of our conversations we had early on was a connection around how different groups of people didn't get the same kind of access, like women, for example, the same access to the same kind of mentoring, the amount of mentoring, and really important, I think, the same quality. And because of that, didn't see a lot of the same outcomes when it comes to their careers. And I thought that really resonated with me in some of the research I did as a sociologist around the aspects of gender, work, and family in particular, and understanding how women we're experiencing the workplace in very different ways. And this was just one of the many ways that we saw that. And so Brad and I set out and worked together to do the research for Athena Rising and to write that book, which came out in 2016. And one of the things I think you'll find interesting, and the listeners out there, is that, the methodology behind it, of course, we brought together all the latest social science evidence and research to back it up. So it's all full of evidence-based best practices when it comes to mentoring and sponsoring. But really important, because I think that when Brad and I started talking to a lot of our colleagues about the book and said, hey, we're going to write this book about women and mentoring in the workplace and mentoring relationships. And a lot of our female colleagues would look at us and they had this kind of funny look on their face and they go, you guys do realize you're just a couple of dudes writing about relationships and women in the workplace. We're like, yeah, we get that. But it was a really important point, because we needed to make sure that women's voices and experiences were front and center, especially as two male authors on a topic like this. That women's voices and experience were front and center in everything that we did. And so we interviewed women from across industries, across professions, as many diverse experiences as we could find about what it looked like when, and what they most appreciated when men were their mentors, and what would they like to share with men in terms of, from an aspirational perspective, things that they ought to be doing more of, and in some cases less of as well. And in some cases we got to talk to their male mentors and hear from them. And I think that was also a great learning experience for us, to hear from them in particular what they most appreciated and what they learned in a lot of cases from their female mentees.
No, that's, it's interesting. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Shannon Polson. We had her on the show, and she would be right up your alley. She wrote the Grit Factor, kind of how she wrote. Yeah, it was a great book, really well articulated. And one of the things I loved about Shannon was she talks about the whole biases without getting controversial. Like, she's able to manage it in a very graceful way, but acknowledges that within the military construct, which is highly male dominated, the challenges. And I think in her book, she interviews women that overcome those challenges. Be interesting to know, of those people she interviewed, the impact of male mentors, because I don't think she went into that. Have you spoken to her about that?
I have, and in particular, there's some overlap too with some of the participants in her book and ours,
Okay.
which was kind of fun to talk about some of the people we knew, and we know a lot of people in common, despite the fact that we come from different services. Her being from an Army, but aviation also. from the helicopter community, but me from the Navy side. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's critical and important. And so yeah, it was a lot of fun sharing those with Shannon.
Yeah. So let's go to the origins here because I'm really interested as a father of a daughter and seeing her wild spirit, and she's just so me right now. And I want to maintain that enthusiasm, curiosity, intensity she has. How are girls socialized differently in a way that you see sets them up for potential limitations?
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot there, right? And I think, and this is a two-sided coin, of course, right? At least that that how girls are socialized, but then there's the flip side of how boys are socialized. And again, it's really hard sometimes to separate the two.
Mhm.
But there's so many of these with girls in particular. And so one of the ones that comes up all the time when it comes to mentoring, and I think this is really important for again your male listeners as well as the women out there, to hear this conversation about emotions, for example, and how we socialize. And it's not just social, it's also a cultural phenomenon too, about how we socialize kids, young people, to handle and or express emotions. And I mean handle in the sense of how people who are witnessing or reacting to other people's emotions, and how they're reading those emotions, and how they interact with people in that sense. But with girls, in many cases, you know, there's a and again, this is generalized. I'm going to speak from a more of a kind of a Western perspective here, but girls are generally socialized to be able to express emotions, and that's acceptable and expected, right? And so, for example, tears being one of those ones out there that are girls are allowed to express tears. That's generally accepted, whereas boys are not. Boys are socialized very differently. That they're not. They learn very quickly. They get a lot of negative feedback about expressing tears. Yet it's interesting, when you get to the workplace, now we have them as adults, and suddenly, we get into in a variety of different settings, mentoring being one of those places that I think this is important because there's a gender dynamic here that, you know, when when women express tears, what does that mean? And oh, by the way, there's this again very much a generalized understanding that women cry more than men. Um, there's some science behind that, by the way. And the reality is that women produce more prolactin, which is the hormone that does produce tears. So they do. But again, how they're expressed is socially and culturally defined. And because we socialize girls to say, hey, it's okay to express tears. Boys, not so much, right? They find a million different ways to hold them back and to not show and express those kinds of emotions in that particular way. But the other thing that it also keeps us from understanding what they mean, right? And because tears are just a part of the expression, and we're really signaling to others about something that we're experiencing, something that we're feeling in the moment, and what we may need, right? So, from an empathy perspective, what we may need as a person, and in a work setting, that's important, right? Because what people need is what they need to thrive and to not just survive, but thrive and to excel and perform in their job. But tears don't always mean the same thing. And, so often men think that when a woman cries that, somehow we've offended her, or she's upset, she's sad in some way, stressed out. Women will also tell you that that's not always the case, that sometimes they tear up when they're really excited about something. You ever get a little watery eyed? And I know men do this as well, get a little watery eyed when they're really excited about something. Women also said that, when you're really frustrated by something, this is another one that comes out all the time, that they may tear up, or they may look like they're crying and expressing tears in a particular way. And so, this is one, again, that we're socialized to interact in a particular way that really kind of holds people back. And when, in particular, men as mentors and mentoring women, when men are afraid that, oh, I might upset her, I might challenge her or stress her out in a way that's going to make her cry. And these are getting into kind of some of these very patriarchal and kind of benevolent sexism
Mm.
aspects of this, chivalrous in some ways too, I guess. But it holds us back from doing the kind of mentoring and the developing aspects that we need to be doing to have them excel, to have them grow and develop as leaders in the same way that we know as men we had people do that for us, right? But we have this assumption that, oh, we can't do that for them because, oh, I don't want to do that. And so we hold it back. And this is one of the challenges, right, in how we're socialized in doing this. But, emotions are just one of them.
Mm.
We're socialized around how, and this gets into leadership perceptions eventually as we think about women. When women become assertive, right, then, or directive in nature as leaders, very stereotypically masculine, right? Agentic is the way we often talk about it. They get labeled your favorite B word. And as an
Mhm.
adult, that's not bossy. As a girl, it might be bossy, but it's something else as a woman leader out there. And again, this gets to, their ability to use authority, to direct and use power, right? And this is the pushback that they often get. And sometimes as men, we just we end up, if we don't understand that, we buy into it. And we say, well, and we just agree with that in some ways. And it's like, no, 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 no. You can't, that's not helpful. In the same way about women's competence, that we as men, and we're socialized as boys, there's an assumption that as boys that, you can do things, you can do all of these things in the world, actions that are looked at as being boy things or things that men do, right? In the realm of what men do, as opposed to what women do, which is not what boys do. And so therefore women don't have competence in that. And we learn that at a very young age. I mean, it's really quite scary to see how young the kids learn these kinds of things. And that, again, we take those into the workplace as adults, and that becomes now women are having to constantly prove themselves, right? We as men, we demand that hey, before you get to do that, you got to show me that you've got the experience to be able to do that.
Mm.
Whereas RJ, I look at you and I go, oh, for doing this role, RJ's never done it before, but I'm sure he's going to do great, because I assume as a man that you're going to be able to do it because you have potential, right? So we evaluate men on potential and women on proven performance in the past. And as we know as leaders, you'll never get there if you're always waiting if you have to have the experience for the next job, guess what? You just never get there.
It's an interesting one there that you touched on because, you know, we know that women will tend to not stretch themselves in assuming they can meet a gig where a dude will.
Yep.
And I wonder how much or how incumbent that is as fathers or people raising girls early to get them to push themselves in the same way that we would expect our boys to, right? And I think as leaders, we then have these young women, it is incumbent on us. I was having a conversation to a couple of the young girls in our organization the other day about, you know, equating game changers within a business to the actual tennis player versus the crew. And, you know, saying to the girls that at some point in your career, you're going to want to become the tennis player, right? Like you're going to want to be the man in the arena. And well, how do we then get you there? But the challenge, and I know in your book, you talked about it, is women will tend to want to be competent before stretching. And that's an interesting point. Do you have anything on that?
Yeah, and they get that messaging very young, right? As young girls, that they need to have that competence. They have to prove themselves first, because when they do fail, then or they take risk. And this is another one. I think risk taking is another interesting aspect of this too. Is how that's socialized. They get all this very negative messaging and backlash and penalties that come at them that tell them, oh, that's not okay. I shouldn't take risk like that because that's not valued, right? And we get that messaging either from our parents, it could be from teachers, it could be from other important adults in our lives as we're growing up, coaches, or another place that, again, you can find some of that as well. Very much socialized. Whereas with boys, risk taking No, that's the more risk you take, right? We actually applaud that, and we value it, and we encourage you to do more of that. And the fact that you've never done that before, you don't know how to do these things. You'll figure it out. Go do it. Just try it. You'll be all right. And we accept those things, and that again, those last and they stay with us down the road. And this is why I think in particular it takes on a little different perspective for women as girls become women and they get into the workforce. Well, now we put it into the workplace, and now it's, well, okay, there's this job, and gosh, it seems like that would be a great job. Maybe even somebody's told me that would be a great job. And we've all seen the research, there's 8 criteria for the job, 8 qualifications or competency areas for the job. And, and she's got like 7 of the 8, and she won't put her name in the hat. She won't, self promote herself towards going into doing that or nominate herself. But there are 27 guys who don't even meet half the criteria who are like, I got that, I'm in, and they're putting their names in the hat, right? And so it's like, well, wait a minute, right? So what's holding them back? And it is a lot of it's been socialized. They've learned that in a variety of different ways. But this is where we as men, as mentors, and as we understand how this operates, we can overcome some of that, and we can say, hey, I saw this job opening and I thought you would be perfect for this, and here's why. And go through all of her accomplishments, her achievements, the milestones, her experience, and her potential, and why this maps into the vision for her career going forward. Show her what that looks like, and give her that affirmation. Again, women are much more likely to experience imposter feelings in a very male-dominated workplace, right? Because you look around and you're like, I don't know that I really fit here. Did they make a mistake when they hired me? And I don't see anybody who looks like me. And what am I doing here? Kind of a thing. So it's really easy to get a lot of little messages there that tell you that you don't belong and that you're not necessarily qualified to move forward into these things. But we can overcome that if you understand how it operates. And we see that because those 27 dudes who put their name in the hat, and they're not half as qualified as she is.
So why that leads, I guess, to the crux of the piece here. Why should men, or why does men mentoring women differ from women mentoring women? Like, where's the value there? Like, why is that so important? Other than from a guy's perspective, doing the right thing and being a good dude, but
Sure.
How does it actually benefit the woman and the organization?
Yeah, and this comes up all the time, and I think it's a great conversation that needs to be had, because I think it gets a lot of people kind of moving in the right direction towards what we need to be accomplishing. And the first thing is, most people, when you enter into a career, you enter in the workplace, what's the first thing you're told as a junior person? Go find a mentor, right? Go find somebody to help guide you and to show you the ropes and give you all the information you need, and give you some insight into where, your strengths are and where you need to be headed. And that's great. And so what do you do when you go look for a mentor? You and I go look for a guy. How about a woman? She might look for a guy, but in most cases, she's probably like us. She's going to look for somebody who looks like her, a woman, a senior woman in the organization. Too many male-dominated industries and professions, right? There just aren't that many senior women as you go up there. There might be a lot of junior women, but there aren't a lot of senior women often up there. And so guess what? If you're doing a great job of recruiting and hiring lots of talented junior women, which again, lots of organizations have broken the code on this already, but to retain them, we've got to do the mentoring. We've got to do the sponsoring, all the career development pieces of that. And if you go, well, for the 3 senior women we have, you're going to mentor these 300 junior women. There's just not enough time in a day. The math doesn't work. And it's not fair. These senior women have real jobs, and they have a lot of responsibility, and they just can't afford to be, mentoring that many, all the junior women. So, but why can't men do it? And here's the interesting part. So when women are mentored by men, they make more money. They have more promotions. They're more successful. We're more likely to retain them in our organization. They're more likely to have a higher organizational identity and commitment to the organization. All great things that, you go down to HR and they're like, yes, that's what we want. Right.
David, just with that, is that generally because the competence increases or the male helps navigate the political scene, or both?
And that's not because we as guys are better mentors, by the way. So we're not. Absolutely not. It's because we tend to be more in more positions of power,
Yeah.
status, influence, the ability to open doors. We have more
Mm.
social capitals, we have different kinds of networks. And so you can do those kinds of things. And this is why it's important that, again, that men be involved. If we're going to continue to create more equity in the workplace, that we have to mentor more diversely and think about our mentoring, who we mentor from a network perspective. So thinking about who's in your mentoring network in terms of who you're mentoring, and do they all look like you? That ought to be a question that we ask ourselves. And if so, why is that? And is that by choice, or is that by because we're just waiting to see who comes to us, or is it people we're reach out to, or why aren't we mentoring in a more diverse manner? In the same way that you should look at your mentoring network in terms of who's mentoring you, right? So for men, it's important that we have female mentors out there for the same reasons that it's important for us to be mentoring women, right? Because there's a lot of great benefits that we're missing out on, and our organization's missing out on if we don't do it that way.
I would also be controversial in saying this, but I'm going to do it anyway. That my view is when you mentor women, women tend to be more loyal to the firm and to people and to leaders. That's been my experience. Whereas dudes will typically think of themselves first. So, like for
Hmm.
me, what makes sense is when you mentor women and you really invest in women, women are smart and capable, but they tend to be more loyal. So I feel that there's a potentially competitive advantage for the firm. Would you say that's true, my assumption, or is that kind of untested?
That is true, and there's research to back that up. That again, and you would find it in the research around what they would call organizational commitment. And this is where, and this relates to things like so. And here's why it works and why this happens. It's about developing trust. And when people feel like they have trusting relationships, they feel like they belong, they're valued, they're respected, you appreciate what I bring. And so therefore I'm loyal. I'm loyal back to the company. The other thing that people often forget with mentoring, and I think this is really important for everyone out there, that remember that when your mentee looks at you as the mentor, you represent the organization, assuming we're in an organizational setting here, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You represent the organization. They don't see you as being somehow separate or just as an individual. No, you're part of whatever the organization is, which is why it's important. We've been having these conversations around this during the pandemic in particular about people feeling isolated, and making sure that mentors were reaching out to their mentees to know that, hey, no, I'm still here. I still care about you. I'm still committed to our relationship. I'm still committed to helping you advance and reach your career goals and your career dreams out there. And it's interesting that it makes such a difference because, again, mentees, we've seen this in the research, believe, right, that it's not just their mentor reaching out to them, it's my company is reaching out to me. My company cares about me. And so therefore we build the trust, we build the loyalty and the commitment.
Just to uh, unpack your views on this, because this is obviously very topical. Organizations are moving to more of an affirmative action stance with women.
Mhm.
Where's your view on? So I've had conversations with, particularly with Joel Neeb, who was in the Air Force. He was a elite Air Force pilot, and we talked about combat situations, which you'd be familiar with.
Mhm.
How do you overlay the best person for the job versus a the affirmative action movement, and what's your view on that? Like,
Mhm.
do you have a view on that?
I do, and let me first tell you what, because again, I'm as a behavioral scientist, I'm all about the research and the evidence. I like to be
Hmm. Hmm.
informed, and,
Hmm.
and our feelings about them, perceptions are important too. But again, when you're talking about affirmative action, we're talking about either quotas or
Hmm. Hmm.
or goals or
Hmm.
targets. And the first thing I would tell you is that so there's a difference between quotas, targets, and goals. but they're all effective, by the way. So you can say a lot of people don't like affirmative action because it's directive in nature and it's telling people what they have to do, as opposed to thinking about more of a kind of collaborating and bringing people along. A different way maybe in the 21st century to think about that. We tend to like that, and you can certainly equate that today to some places in the United States when it comes to mandates around vaccines, and that same idea. But here in particular, I think it's really interesting and useful that understanding that, so targets and goals, and sometimes that language is used a little bit differently, and in terms of people's ability to choose and how much they understand about that. But in general, those work better. They're very successful. And as opposed to quotas, because that's a mandate now, they're not as successful as having goals. So they're targets. They're things that people to aim and motivate behavior in a particular direction and to work toward, as opposed to being said, thou shalt do this. And you have to do it by this date and this time. It actually works. And so in particular, in majority dominated, in this case, male dominated areas and spaces, to kind of get things moving in the right direction, targets and goals are helpful in getting us going. And once we begin to shift and move the pendulum a little bit in terms of numbers, as you increase the percentage of women, and we, you don't have to get all the way to parity, but you get to some sort of a core group of women, and men begin to say, wow, they're doing just fine. Matter of fact, they're doing incredible, and I'm learning a lot from them. And oh, by the way, we're doing better as a company. And so suddenly your eyes get open. There's all this awareness of other things that are going on around you that we were missing out on all along, and we just had no idea. But sometimes to get things just moving in that direction, it does take something like affirmative action, or again, I think targets and goals have been shown in the research to work much better.
Yeah, no, I get that, and probably for another show, because it's a massive digression, I'd be keen to understand the nuanced differences of, say, a black man mentoring a white woman. Like, these would be interesting dynamics that would really be a woman mentoring a man. Like, that's a whole nother conversation. But because I can get lost in the detail, I think we'll stay focused. But I find that stuff interesting, and I'm sure you would have your views on that. In terms of what do you find most men struggle with in terms of inhibitors when looking to mentor or actually mentoring women?
So as barriers,
correct.
Okay.
Barriers.
Yeah, and that's another great question, because I think that that's not well understood. And I think, again, part of overcoming the challenge of increasing diversity in mentoring is overcoming some of these barriers. When we did the research for Athena Rising, Brad and I, as we were talking not just to women, but as we were talking with men and learning about their experiences in mentoring, how they overcame a lot of these. And there were so many of them that you probably remember in the book, there's a chapter in there that talks about the reluctant male syndrome, RMS as we were calling it. And, and we laugh about it because, and we were being a little tongue in cheek there and having some fun with it. But there are a lot of these out there. And so it starts with things like biases, implicit associations, perceptions of each other, right? And so if I as a man and I don't understand this, that I have perceptions of women as they're, wow, she's really nice, and but she doesn't seem like real strong leader material, or wow, she seems like a risky investment. I'm afraid, as one man told us that he looked at originally at women in one case as kind of ticking time bombs of maternity, as he called them. Like they were suddenly going to start popping out babies all over the place. And it's like, which is fine if they do, but but again, that perception that, if I invest in her as a mentee, and then I'm going to lose her, right? Because she's going to have a baby and she's never coming back. So these perceptions, right? Implicit associations about who women are and what they can do or can't do, back to their competence, right? Aspect as well. hold us back from investing in them or not seeing them as being worthy of our time and our investment in that way. The other one I think is really interesting is anxiety. And so a lot of guys told us that, I obviously have a mother, and for a lot of men out there, they may have sisters and and other female family members. Many men are maybe even married to a woman or have a daughter. And so they felt like, they were socialized in a way that they had a kind of a script to follow and what that relationship looked like, what was expected, what was okay, where the lines were, and all these kinds of things. But they said, I don't really have a script when it comes to having a close personal and professional relationship, very intimate in many cases, with a woman at work. I don't know what that looks like. That's non-sexual, right? And we joked about these because we said that, well, men have these man scripts, these social scripts for how to interact with women that they know and their families, but they don't have this one at work. And so what happens when I get into a close relationship with a woman at work, like a mentoring relationship, how do I act? What do I do? And believe it or not, men got very anxious about it. And what do you do when you're anxious? You avoid, right? That's discomfort. And so we tend to avoid those things. But the hard part about this is that the reality is the only way to overcome that, as my clinical psychologist co-author would tell you, is that if you're overcoming any kind of anxiety, is exposure. So you need exposure therapy to overcome this. So more interaction, more coffees, more mentoring, more time together, more lunches, more collaborating and working together on projects, so that we begin to become more comfortable working together and we understand what that feels and looks like. But for me and many other maybe older men who've been around the military for a long time, we grew up in an environment where there were no women, in the workplace, right? My first squadron, there were no women there, none. It wasn't until much later that we had women integrated in. And it was suddenly, this is one of the things we never talked about, was how do you interact with women at work? And men were scared. And they were scared of making a mistake, of offending her, of doing something wrong, of ending up in HR, because you crossed a line that somehow men didn't think they understood or knew what to do. And and the other really kind of funny one here is that a lot of guys told us, like, oh yeah, but wouldn't it be weird if I was in a mentoring relationship with a woman and I found her attractive? Oh my God, that would just be so weird. And so we always love to remind men of this great social psych research that talks about mutual attraction. And in this research, you bring people together, men and women, and they basically evaluate how attractive they think the other person is across from them. And so you rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, right? And then you turn around and you have to rate how much do you think the other person finds you attractive. Right. So you flip the scale on them. And, as it turns out, there's one gender that radically overestimates how much they think the other one finds them attractive.
I wonder what gender that is, man.
Yeah, it's us dudes. I'm sorry. But, one, again, overestimating things. But so, there's all these things that were going on. And then, of course, Me Too, in 2017, when Me Too went widespread, that it just exacerbated a lot of these issues. And so there's a lot of these that, we as men, we have to learn how do we overcome these challenges? How do we overcome some of these barriers to engaging and seeing these really incredibly talented women as colleagues and worthy of our time and the investment, and really collaborating and understanding that. And that's why we use the term Athena in the title of the book, was because for us, for me and Brad, when we were at the time both teaching at the Naval Academy, we said, if more men could be like us, where we see the incredibly talented women that we work with every day, the students, these women who are, again, they are true Athenas. They are incredibly bright and, so smart. And, but at the same, so this is the wisdom of Athena, right? But at the same time, they're warriors, true warriors, and they're going to go lead sailors and Marines into combat. And to provide anything less than as much as we're giving to the men, would be a disservice not only to them, but to their people. And I think that, again, as leaders, if we could remember that, and as mentors, if we could remember that we need to be doing that, it's not just for them, it's for the people that they're going to be leading and the success of our own organization. So finding different ways to motivate yourself to do the work, I think, is really helpful.
Just a reflection upon your context in the military. I haven't been in the military, but I can assume that what creates the added complexities that bonding and trust in intense situations, to get to those tight and close relationships, there's a level of intimacy and brother sisterhood that occurs, which could blur the lines of traditional HR. For instance, you go out and get drunk all night and you do stuff that's crazy, that builds that trust and equity in with each other. And that would have been quite challenging, I would imagine, in the military, as it went from male domination to, okay, well, how do we enable women to now share in those equity building events that we do, or we did, which only had dudes, right? And so that would have been a very confusing and probably not managed intentionally by the military. Like it would have been a hindsight. Oh shit, there's women in the military. We need to figure out how we're actually gonna, right. And I guess now with the high, with obviously we're much more progressed than we were according to Shannon, not very much so, but like it would have been challenging, I would imagine.
Yeah. But I think that there's an element of truth there to the, thinking about the bonding and the relationship building, right? The trust building that has to go on there and what that looks like. And, if we, again, in organizations whether there's just a few women or there's lots of women, but if those are the places where, again, not saying what are the right types of events or right types of activities we should be doing to create those, but whatever they are, right? If you're not including women, then you're isolating them. And you're also, this is part of the challenge with, again, why it's important for men to be doing the mentoring as well, is that we're not sharing a lot of the insider intel, right? All the insider information, the hidden agendas, this is where you need to go to do this, the informal rules and practices. And we all know that, hey, there's the written rules and policy and process, and then there's how things really happen in the everyday practice of doing things. And if you're not on the inside, then you don't know these things. And if those things only get shared in the men's room or on the golf course or wherever, guess what? Women are never going, it's going to be really challenging for them to succeed in the same way that guys do. They will never be on that same level playing field. So again, does it change some of the activities and the way we do the trust building? Certainly. Did some of that need to change anyway? Certainly. And again, in the military is just one place. I mean, this is going on in the civilian workforce too, about a lot of places where, the after work hours, time in the bar and, and doing these kinds of things, for a lot of ways, that's just not working for everyone today. And recognizing that we've got to find ways to do the relationship and trust building that includes everybody. So what are the kinds of things we need to be doing? When do we need to be doing them? Where do we need to be doing them? And as a leader, I think we really have to be thoughtful and purposeful about doing that.
I've got one final question. It's a two-part question. One's tactical, one's strategic. One is, okay, you've identified your mentee. How do you actually execute? Do you go up and say, hey, do you want to be my mentee? And the second part of the question is, from an organizational perspective, how could an organization then embed that practice as a habit?
Wow. Yeah. Do we have a couple more hours? So let me hit the first one first, the tactical, because I think this is a great one, and it's really important too. And oh, by the way, it works both directions, right? So think about also, what if you're the junior woman and you're seeking mentorship, and women are encouraged to do this, right? To go out there and find that guy, right, that you think would be a great mentor, and find a way to strike up that relationship. So there's different challenges with that, but let me do it from the way you just gave it. And so let's say I'm the senior guy And I see you, RJ. You're going to play the junior woman right here, right now. So let me try it a couple different ways with you,
Hair,
right?
get
And, no,
long hair.
and not everybody's going to see this, right? But they can at least hear me when I say this. But RJ, I've been watching you. Can I mentor you?
Yes. Am I supposed to say
Maybe.
it?
And let me run away first. And
or that's a bit intense.
and it might be kind of, I'd like to mentor you. It's like,
Hey,
in my
how you doing?
creepiest voice I could find, right? And guess what? Women are going to run away from that, and I'll explain why. But if it's not obvious to the listeners, but how about try this? Hey, RJ, I saw that presentation you did today, and wow, I was so impressed. I mean, you really, really did an incredible job. And, I was thinking to myself that, the hiring committee here, when they hired you, they really got it right. And we are so fortunate to have you here. And, if there's anything I could ever do to, to help you and helping you move forward and figuring out where you want to go and what's next for you, hey, my door's open. Love to have a coffee with you. Let me know if that would be good for you. And so there's two different ways there. The first one, obviously, I, kind of being very creepy, but I didn't provide any context for why I was asking you, or, what was the point behind it. And so you could fill in the blanks pretty quickly, right? If you were a woman, and be like, what does he really want? What's he after? And right, all sorts of things come to mind at that point. But if I give you context, like I did in the second version, right, and I put it in a particular way, I didn't even ask or offer you mentorship, right? I didn't even use the word mentor in there. And people find that because it can be kind of a little bit of invoking a little bit of privilege, as you think about kind of it reinforces our notions about hierarchy and and what it looks like to be in a mentoring relationship. And I didn't do that. I treated you more as a colleague, somebody I saw who belonged here and really valued who you are and what you want to do. And I snuck in a little affirmation with you too, because I told you about how great you were and how lucky we were to have you. And people love that. And it really makes a difference in, again, people feeling valued and wanting to do those things. And it was an offer. So if you come by my office, great. If you don't come by my office, that's fine too. It's okay either way. So thinking about providing context, I think, is really important. Making it an offer, not asking for a relationship. And this goes both directions too, right? For the women out there listening, if you're asking a more senior man to be your mentor, as Sheryl Sandberg told us in many interviews with her, that, it's really kind of awkward when people would come up after she would speak and they would say, hey, Sheryl, I love that. It was awesome. Would you be my mentor? And it's like, oh, it's like, what a mood killer, right? You're asking for this relationship. I don't even know you. And who are you? And do we have any chemistry? And is there any, what's the synergy between us? And it's really a mood killer. So start small. Informal relationships like this, they start with a small ask and a small offer in some cases, and then they grow. As you get to know somebody, you spend more time together, you find the connection, and this is what we call the mere exposure effect. We begin to like these people, and we begin to open up, again, all of our social capital and opportunities for them. Strategically, we really need to move away from, for the most part, from a mentoring program perspective to a mentoring culture perspective. And what I mean by that is, it's okay to have some mentoring programs, because one of the things we know for formal programs is that people who are less likely to get mentoring, which are people who are non-majority, so women in a traditionally male-dominated industry, people of color, again, other people like that, because it's hard for them to, people to look around and to connect with them and see them. They don't flock together. So they're more likely to get mentoring. That's a good thing. But most people appreciate the informal aspect of mentoring. So how do you create a mentoring culture? Well, we got to value it, and we got to find small ways, just like with when I offered you the opportunity to come by and we could talk more about your career here. You can affirm people in the work that they're doing when you see them. There could be small interactions in the, as we're passing in the break room, and just make connections, even if you don't know them very well, and begin to value the little parts of that we can do, and we can make these offers, and doing this on an everyday basis. The other thing, don't forget that as peers, we can be great mentors for each other. And people forget this, that peers are very influential, and we can, again, do a lot of very informal mentoring with each other as peers. Cohort mentoring is another way to do it, and reverse mentoring, I think, is one of the fun ways to think about this too, if you haven't heard about that. That, again, where you think about junior employees mentoring a senior employee. So you got this brand new, maybe a junior woman who is mentoring the CEO, this white male CEO of the company. What could he possibly learn from her? All kinds of things. And this is one of the great things about, and last thing I'll leave you with, is the benefits of doing mentoring across difference. I'll just put it that way broadly. But as we think about mentoring across gender differences, that when men mentor women, they learn a lot. And what they learn is they get access to more information in the organization that they wouldn't have otherwise had. They have more diverse networks. And I think the great thing about this is we find that they have more empathy, higher emotional intelligence, better communication skills, all makes them more successful and better leaders. And at the end of the day, they get to take that home. So it makes you a better partner and parent as well. So it's a win-win-win, but we often don't talk about the benefits of doing the mentoring across difference and what the advantages are of that in particular, because it gets you outside of places and you're really learning a lot more.
No, that's we I was involved in a conversation with an organization of intergenerational learning, and there's a whole piece in that, man. Like, just to kind of surmise and create a picture of what you're talking about. A few days ago, we had a presentation, and me and my business founder, who's a founder here, we were getting coached by the junior staff on working the technology, the presentation, just the basic stuff that at our, because we're not tech orientated, just basic. I mean, there's so much information and gains to be had in that kind of 360 degree of mentorship. So I think that's quite profound in terms of the potential impact. But we will leave it there, David. I really, really appreciate your time. Very insightful, very topical, important discussion. Where can we find more about yourself, as well as Brad? Where can we go and get more information?
Yeah, thanks for asking. We have a website. It's Workplace Allies, all one word, workplaceallies.com. And you can read about what we're up to and our latest writing and where we're producing in different outlets. And then certainly more about the book, our first book, Athena Rising. And then, of course, our new book that just came out with Harvard Business Review Press just this last year. And that's Good Guys, How Men Could Be Better Allies for Women in the Workplace.
Well, thank you so much, David. All the best from here down under. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it, RJ.